So, welcome to the panel where we are going to talk about the workplace. We are going to talk about some opportunities in terms of blockchain. And with me, I have several guests. My name is Antonio Santos. I'm calling at this moment from Lisbon, Portugal. And with me, I have Vernon Sankey, who has been a board member for the last 30 years. He's been the CEO of Racket. So he has a long experience at that level in leadership roles. We have Glenn Parry, a professor of digital transformation at the University of Surrey. And we have Linda Goetze, who is co-founder of DFM Data Corporation. And we have Charlie, Copa Venture Associate from New Chip Accelerator. So going into the topic that was able to bring us here today, and knowing that Vernon also has written some books on some topics that are very important to the times that we're facing today. I would like to ask you, Vernon, where are we today in terms of the workplace? We have been looking at so many changes over the last year. People working from home, families taking care of their kids while working from home. So many women having to take care of their elderly parents and getting a little bit backward in terms of some of the achievements in terms of the workplace. So where are we today, Vernon?
Okay, thank you, Antonio. Well, I think the first thing, I just take it back just a little bit and say, well, what is actually happening in the world today? And it's a continuation of something that's been going on for some time, which is the development, the very rapid development of all technology. And we have found that this technology has improved, developed, and is accelerated at an unprecedented pace. It's leaving, however, behind a whole lot of people who are very, very anxious about the future. So they're anxious in the workplace, they're anxious in the home, they're anxious geopolitically, and at the leadership level, they're anxious as well. And the main reason for that is that we have developed technologies at a pace that the human mind has not been able to manage in terms of its implications. So as Einstein said, the world that we have created as a result of a thinking we have done thus far creates problems that we cannot resolve with the same level of thinking that existed when we created them. So we're living in a postmodern technology age with actually what is Bronze Age thinking. Our thinking has not kept pace. In other words, by thinking, what I mean is the way we look at the world, the way we look at issues, the way we look at problems, the way we look at people has not evolved. And so with the addition of COVID, it is no surprise whatsoever that we are having an epidemic, not just of a disease, but much more of anxiety and stress. So you see that everywhere. You see that in the workplace, and you see that in the home. You see that with people. So one of the things we do is we get these people who come to us because we coach and we give them therapy and we counsel, and it's a huge issue. So in the workplace, there are some great positives, of course. I mean, I'm a real fervent supporter of all the technological changes that we're doing, and it's helped us to be more remote, to have access to new technologies, to do conferences like this now, which you can do remotely across the world. It's allowed us to be much more inclusive. We develop programs which allow people with all kinds of disabilities to actually have first-rate work. So there are a lot of positives, of course, but there are enormous negatives. And that's because the human dimension hasn't been properly understood. So the work-life balance is completely out of kilter. On the one hand, people work from home, that's great. But on the other hand, with the technology that exists today, they're on call 24/7. People are called in the middle of the night and nobody seems to bother. And with the time changes, nobody bothers about that either. So the resultant state of mental health is a very, very serious issue. It's a real challenge to leadership. And we need to change the way we think about things. So we spend a lot of time helping people manage anxiety because the way we look at the world creates the anxiety, whereas it doesn't have to be like that at all. So we need to change the way we approach life in order to make sure that this technological development is a positive and not a negative for future generations. And that has huge implications. And the whole education system, for example, is not fit for purpose. It's okay for teaching technology, but it's not okay for teaching people how to manage the implications of this. So I suppose I'll stop there, but the workplace implications to me are huge in terms of the way in which we manage and help people in the workplace to understand what's happening, to understand the causes of stress, and therefore how you deal with those in a way which is actually sustainable, long-lasting. And then they can look at what's happening with equanimity. They can understand what's important from what's not important. They can understand the importance of their family and their lifestyle in a totally different way. And as a result of this, incidentally, when we've done our coaching work, is people are more effective as well as much less anxious.
Thank you, Vernon. And no, in relation to what you were saying, and then I was looking to Glenn's profile and to part of his work in terms of digital transformation. And one of the areas that we've seen over the last couple of, that we've seen accelerated, it was digital transformation. And there was several graphics being shared over last year that COVID is doing more for digital transformation than CIOs and CEOs. So Glenn, can you give us your view on that? And what was your perspective in terms of the pace of change that was generated by COVID?
Sure. Well, remote working's not new, but it's new to many. We've definitely seen that accelerated. And one of the studies we've done is working with community businesses, which are businesses often not for profit, but they are unique in that they are businesses that are in and of a place. So in the UK, community businesses might be a local library that is no longer profitable. So the community take it over. And this has happened quite a lot as the government has shrunk pubs, little shops, this sort of thing. And typically they run by often, people who aren't necessarily working at the moment, or people who've retired. And often these are non-digital natives. So it's been interesting, and they're often very useful services that these little community businesses provide for the community. So they're very important. And what we've seen is some of them under the furlough scheme just shut up shop. But more interestingly, a whole group of people have very quickly developed very advanced digital services. They've adopted Zoom. I mean, I'm an academic, and we lived on Zoom before, and nobody knew what we were talking about. Now everybody knows what Zoom is. But now, talking to these community businesses, they didn't know what we did, and now we talk to them, and they say, we're doing these. There's one organization that provides counseling services. It was traditional paper-based, face-to-face, and very quickly they scaled up. They were on Zoom. They'd got digital diaries. They were checking in, and so that was a move. But the little shops we saw actually moving beyond what Amazon does. So not only have they got electronic ordering to the little shop, they were doing home deliveries in the local area, but beyond that, they knew their clients. So they'd got insight and the sort of, this lady hasn't ordered her milk today. We know she's elderly. What's going on there? Send somebody around and check her out. That sort of advanced services, that most digital agencies aspire to, really knowing and having insight to customers. We're seeing that really at the grassroots level. So it's, those well-being built into advanced digital service. We've seen that develop. So it's an acceleration, and, moving beyond that, we can see there will be as we're starting to open up in the UK, it will be interesting to see what slides back and what stays, and the hybrid models of work that we're likely to see, and what's successful. A lot of firms experimenting. And we can see the pressures already. I mean, if you listen to the news, we're seeing typically property developers and those who rent or own coffee shops in the city saying, no, we must go back to work. The Chancellor doing the same. And if you think about the drivers, Rishi Sunak's probably thinking, if they're not renting the big offices in the city, we're not getting the big corporation tax if they're living at home. And, the tax system actually doesn't favor you working from home because you're claiming tax back on your power. So there's these perverse incentives that don't necessarily look after the mental health, the environment, the well-being of people. So there are interesting times ahead.
Thank you, Glenn. And we also observed that this is a kind of a time of opportunity. So we've seen many startups and people trying to create new technologies, bringing new business in many different areas, from well-being, sustainability, digital nomads. So Linda, you have been working with blockchain, so I presume that you have also been working with startups and entrepreneurs. What are your observations in relation to the times of changes, and particularly in terms of people trying to seize this opportunity?
Definitely a lot of opportunity there in the middle of the pain that COVID has brought. And, we've heard a little bit about, how challenging it is or has been for, moms trying to work and have kids at home. And I've got to say, there's a lot of perks too. There are positives. I'm not wearing, 2.5-inch heels and having to worry about, who's looking at me on the panel and, what they think about my legs, right? So there's those aspects of what this change has brought that are positive. And women have been able to participate as entrepreneurs and engage with their ideas without their gender or how they look, or if they're able to travel or not, being a real player in whether or not they can have advancement or take those opportunities. So yes, there has been an interesting leveling of the playing field in some regard, even though unfortunately women have continued to take some of the hit of caretaking. And I appreciate you, Vernon, for mentioning that, because that's definitely an unfortunate statistic. But the opportunity, wow, when you look at the supply chain, just the innovation that has exploded with DFM Data Core. We are serving the dynamic freight matching industry, and they were less than 3% saturation into the traditional way of doing business. And we were thinking maybe we can get to 7, maybe we can get to 14% in the next 5 years. Depending on what stats you look at, we're already past 7%, and we're well on our way to 30 probably in the next year and a half or two. So that kind of push, the necessity to have visibility, to bring in immutable records that allow diverse organizations across the supply chain to be able to communicate truth and have it be validated has really become the expected, right? Not just the, okay, you tell me I'm going to get efficiencies here, but I really don't want to trust that guy, or, why should I spend all of this money on R&D if, there's not a guaranteed ROI. Now it's like, hey, if you don't do it, you're not going to be providing the customer the visibility that they expect. You're not going to be having the outcomes. And once it goes to the customer, right? The shippers are wanting to get their product to the end point and know that it's there, and know that any exceptions along the way are taken care of appropriately. And nobody wants to be touching paper, right? Any touchless type of technology is really accelerating in adoption because of COVID-19 and people's awareness of, I mean, God knows we've had bacteria and viruses around for millennia, right? This is not a new thing, but there has been a very powerful global media and government effort to put this on everybody's radar very, very powerfully, right? And so it's that awareness that is facilitating adoption. And yeah, blockchain, other emerging technologies, the universal framework of things, we're leapfrogging right now in technology in a way that I don't think would have been possible without the COVID pandemic timeframe. And I don't want to pretend I have a crystal ball and know when that might end, but I know what it's put into motion is going to be a very powerful positive for companies that are focusing on that creation of efficiencies while keeping people at the center of their focus. And so it's that combination, and technologies that allow for us as humans to have a digital twin and to have a presence in the digital space while maintaining our humanity. That's probably a whole nother conversation. I'd love to chat about, the quad ledger and some different things, but yes, this time frame has accelerated adoption of innovative technologies out of necessity. And it's going to be wonderful to see how quickly it continues to progress.
So thank you, Linda. I was reading Charlie's bio and some of his interests, and somehow it links with some of the topics that Vernon mentioned and some of the topics that we mentioned as well. How can we be our best individuals possible in these times while seeking the opportunities, Charlie?
That's a great question, and I think that a lot of people over the past year have been wondering that themselves, because I think a lot of people tell you that they have not felt like they've been their best this past year, even if they've seen, new records. So my job, I talk to founders every single day. I'm talking to founders of early stage startups who are out there making these changes that we're all talking about, and all they're seeing is improvement, right? They're improving their product, they're setting out to actually solve a problem. And a lot of what I hear back from them is that they still don't feel like they're their best, even though they're looking at, there's an arms race right now in funding for startups, right? We've seen funding like we've never seen before. There's money being thrown around, product development. People there's this whole appetite for it. And people still, there's just been a tremendous loss of that human interaction we've had. And what I've seen with a lot of the companies that I'm interviewing and I'm talking to, it's companies that the problem that they're trying to solve is that missing feedback loop of human interaction that comes with being remote, that comes with being locked down. And I'm seeing this in every industry. I'm seeing it in places that you would expect, like e-gaming, right? Gambling, sports, stuff that is a little bit more communal. But I'm seeing new technologies take on this challenge. There's a company that I worked with. It's a mixed reality company, augmented reality, virtual reality. And what they're trying to do is, their original plan was to do this for sporting events, for concerts, to allow more people to get that experience of being in stadium without that. The pivot or the addition that they have made over the past few months, or over the course of the COVID pandemic, has been, how do we make this interactive? How do you sit there with, if I'm in Texas and I've got a cousin that's in Auckland and we want to go to the same Super Rugby game, they can, I can't. How do we make that connection? Because I can watch it on TV. I can wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do so. And so that's what they've set out to do, is their companies are creating new feedback loops to try to create more connection where there hasn't been, so that we can feel like we're being our best selves. My personal recommendation for people, and this is the hardest thing to do, is just act with compassion and love in your heart, right? That's the single best thing that you can do for others around you. It's really easy behind an email, behind a Slack message, behind whatever, to be a little quick, to be a little snippy. And it's not because you're actually angry or upset or anything like that. It's because it's just the nature of it. It's a quick little message, you're shooting it off. But if you really take into consideration the other person, what they may be going through, like just the fact that we've all been behind a screen and we all lost our tans from this past year, whatever it may be, just make sure you go that extra effort, that extra mile with, making sure that they know that you're treating them as a human being, that you've got love and respect in your heart with whatever feedback you may be giving them. And that's incredibly challenging. Thankfully, there's innovation going on there too. I interviewed a founder last week. His whole thing, it's an AI-based chat recognition system that will scan your emails in real time and tell you how positive or negative your language is. And I think that's just fantastic. I've downloaded it already. It's in beta. And I find I'm a pretty positive person, I think, in general, but the fact that somebody thought about that, created that so that other people who maybe are just neutral as a state can take more awareness of their state of the emotion that they're portraying in their written language. I think it's just fantastic. And I think that we're going to continue to see innovation across every industry that is taking into consideration people's emotions, the gray matter that, you know, affects so much of what we do and can get so exposed. It can be such a raw nerve when, you know, we're in the environment that we are today. And I'm really excited to see just the ideas that people keep coming up with and how we can impact this.
Yeah. Can I say something, Antonio?
Of course.
I mean, I totally agree with that. And one of the important aspects of leadership is actually to take that on board, to understand that the human dimension is the only dimension that's going to enable this to work. So we can develop whatever technologies we want, unless the human dimension is there and able to be mobilized and stimulated and encouraged in a positive way, we will not be able to make this work. So if you just take the Internet of Things, which I think Linda was referring to, but it's a wonderful tool, but it also has huge dangers. And if we don't help people to understand how do you make this work? How can it be a positive factor for you? What are the risks associated with it? But with open eyes, and then say that is actually how you can make this happen. It won't happen by itself. So in a workplace, leadership has to take that lead and understand the absolute critical importance of a human dimension. And when I say we need to change the way we think, what I mean is we tend to, we have been educated to think that we're separate individuals. And that leads us to be quite selfish. In reality, we're not separate at all. It's an illusion. We are actually all connected. And what COVID has shown is the importance of this connection. We are all connected. What somebody does in one part of the world today will have ramifications everywhere else. That's the chaos theory.
Vernon, you've been reading my article on LinkedIn. It's literally, we are so connected, and it brings in that cosmic connection that we have. It's literally like the universal spheres are connected, right? But our DNA is entangled in a way that we can't visualize, right? We're not seeing that, but it is nevertheless very, very real. And it's when we grasp that interconnectedness that we have as human beings, and then the connectedness we have to the planet. Look at the ESGs, right? I mean, they point to being responsible for the environment, right? Having a social awareness, so that human connection, that touch point, and then the governance aspect of it, right? It's necessary, because if you don't have governance, then what drives things is greed. And we all see that's done to our planet, right?
Linda, I'm so glad. I mean, we're gonna have to sign you up, because I mean, we teach this. This is one of our books. But that is absolutely what we're talking about. But the necessity to understand that we are not individuals having to fight our own battle in an inimical world. We are connected, and the human race is going to succeed, which it has got this fantastic capacity for mind. It is actually going to have to learn how do we collaborate while maintaining the individuality of characters. That's the balance. And we tend to go from one thing to another. We keep looking at the outside for solutions. I liken this to changing, we try and change the deck chairs of a Titanic. So we say, we'll try another ism, we'll try something else. So we'll change the band, we'll change this, we'll change that. And actually, none of that is ever going to work. We've tried all those different things. We've tried different philosophies. The change is inside. It's how we look at the world. It's our perspective on life. And once you understand that, then, it is not difficult to learn, because it's our nature. It's what's called the Buddha nature. It's our natural state is one that actually is cooperative and helpful, and has love in itself. But we are forced, we are pushed, we are conditioned to thinking that no, I've got to win, and if I've got to win, you've got to lose. And once we start on that, and you see this in the news all the time, then you're lost. We have to reverse the process. And I think in the workplace, leaders have the opportunity to do that, because you've got to, I mean, what is a corporation but an assembly of individuals who actually want to do their best, right? They want to do their best. They want to be a part of something. They want to have a purpose. They want to have a meaning. And a corporation has to develop that and make that not just words, but something that is fundamental all the way through the corporation.
And if we take that, if we take that and extend that understanding to governments, right?
Absolutely.
There's so many conversations where people are like, the government, you know what? It's a group of human beings. It's individuals, right? That if you don't have a positive expectation of their purpose, then do you work to change who those individuals are? Maybe, but there has to be that acceptance of these entities, these companies and countries, governments being truly just made up of human beings. And AI is going to play a very interesting role in potentially humanizing some of those entities, which I think has to be part of our conversation in recognizing what the future of work looks like. And when you have, the algorithms behind, say, LinkedIn, for instance, deciding whether or not you're a good candidate for an opportunity, and those algorithms may or may not be biased in some way based on the data that they've been fed, does that dehumanize the process of us as human beings connecting with opportunity? Yeah. There's a lot there, but sorry to have jumped in on you, Vernon. But
no, Linda, no, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm delighted. We'll let the others. I think the connection that you have made is exactly what we're teaching. It's exactly what we're coaching, and it's exactly what we need to do as humanity if we're to make the changes. When we create a society which is more compassionate, more caring, and you're right, the greed is appalling. Appalling. We could feed the whole of the world very, very easily if we didn't actually use those resources for the wrong purposes. And it's all a function of our mind. So the world that we've created is a function of our mind. If we have polluted oceans, it's because we want inexpensive goods that we can throw away, right? If we have global climate problems, it's a function of what we've done. Through our greed, through our excessive use of resources, which we don't need to do, through fighting nature. We try and control nature. Well, what a ridiculous thing is that? There is no way we can do that. But it's part of this illusion that we're living under. And we have to shift all those things and become who we really are, which is just natural, human. Our humanness is our ability to relate, to be kind, to be thoughtful. Right? That's where you get the most joy. And we can do that in the workplace.
So let me bring you some question from the audience that I would like to address to Glenn, and it's about the future and if the question is about if technology is going to primarily if the workplace is going to be shaped by technology. Or is going to be shaped by people thinking? Or what is your view on that?
Well, picking up on those previous points, Kranzberg's first law, is technology is neither good nor is it bad, but neither is it neutral. And it then gets quite complicated if you ever read his work, but it's the enmeshment of technology into social ecology. And we have to manage that. It's interesting looking where it might go. I mean, I don't know if you've read Virginia Eubank's book, Automating Inequality, where that was a great study looking at the way that systems are built by engineers using AI, and these systems learn all the inequality, but it's coded in, not intentionally, but it is then coded in, much in the same way that luggage racks are at that height for the average male, and seats are at that height for the average male, making at least 50% of the population uncomfortable. This is part of the problem we have with future systems, and it's something to be mindful of. And going forward, when we look at the opportunity space and some of the ideas that we're perhaps developing, we've got already looking at the interviews having AI to help sift when you do have thousands of applicants. We're also looking at the way, we've got a project going forwards that's going to look at the way blockchain and smart contracting might be used to create, it's sort of beyond the gig economy, where if you're creating content, you might have all the different resources registered, all brought together using some system that is smart contracts, blockchain backed. Everybody's brought together. Maybe you're making this sort of thing. We could all be, right, you have to be here, and you could put some geolocation in it. So you're only paid if you get to the right place at the right time. Not that we're paid, but, and then you produce your content, and maybe that content is then registered on the blockchain and it's passed into the cloud for somebody to edit it. And then that's put onto a automated resource platform where it's sold, and then maybe some form of cryptocurrency pays everybody. It takes an awful lot of friction out of, you know, video content production, for example, which is currently lots of people on phones and emails trying to do bits of paper and then having horrible paper-based streams. So there's huge advantage in this future. There's disadvantages, there's challenges to all of this. I mean, another example of, you know, use of blockchain for future work, when we have in the UK nurses and health staff who maybe work at multiple different institutions, they have to maintain a record or a provenance. And that's what blockchain's great for. So then you can show, well, I've done these many hours in these many institutions. Here's my immutable record with appropriate certification, putting it on it. So I can prove to anybody within a trusted system, maybe even globally, that I have these hours of experience. So these are, you know, part of my research. I'm always looking, what does good mean? What does value mean? And value and good, value is sort of the measure of goodness, and value is an extrapolation of value. So it all boils back to moral ethics and what we're trying to do, which speaks to a lot of this conversation. But if we start from this good place, we can actually, again, follow Kranzberg and make the technology do these wonderful and good things. But there are challenges.
Yeah,
such as identity, tax, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure the others can expand on that.
Yeah, I was loving what you were talking about, because if you bake into the code the positive expectation that all of the creators that were involved in something being developed are going to get paid whenever that product is transferred, there's no arguing about it. You determine on the front end what that looks like. You can have, you know, ERC 1155s that, you know, like basically minting an NFT to represent each piece of the product. And then when you group them together into a compound NFT, I think it's ERC 721, then you have something that can be transferred with this immutable record of the chain of ownership. And every time it's transferred, those who contributed to its creation are rewarded for it. Right. And that is part of what the workplace of the future is going to look like, because you're not going to have to worry about, you know, does the boss cut that check at the end of the month? You know, am I really getting all of my royalty fees? Or, you know, did they just decide that they're going to cut an extra 15% off and there's nothing I can do about it? Right. So the technology is enabling, through the transparent record, the ability for greed to be obvious if it's baked in, right? Everybody can see it. Like this is the outcome because of who created this. But then there's also that opportunity for people with the right intentions and with the purpose of supporting innovators to actually have that value for their work transferred over time, and, you know, be a legacy for their children as well. So there's a lot of good things that are coming down the pike with the emerging tech, for sure.
There's a startup that was founded in Ireland that probably you all know, called Stripe. And when they were looking for funding and trying to do their pitch, they went to banks, investors here, and everybody was telling them, "Oh, this is not going to happen. What we are trying to do is not possible. You are not going anywhere." And then they will pursue. They end up finding investors in the States. They move to the Bay Area, and they end up succeeding. So, Charlie, there's a process of change here. You know, adopting new technology, changing the way how people work, and how can we, referring to the case of Stripe, that in the beginning nobody was listening to them. How can we start listening to people who are implementing blockchain at workplace in ways that work? Because we also know that sometimes there's a lot of noise about the blockchain and people not feel, oh no, I don't really know what this is. How can we actually make turn things around and start to make it happen?
Sure. So the problem that you described is a fundamental one that my company actually sets out to change. We're a fully remote accelerator program. We work with companies wherever they sit, and we don't ask that they move. We think that's ridiculous that the access to capital should be dictated by where you sit, who you rub elbows with at the water cooler, right? Like, so that's like in the startup world, just a fundamental issue that we're setting out to change. How we go about doing that is we try to take a holistic approach, but ultimately it's about telling the right story, right? You have to have the audience you're talking to has to fundamentally understand the problem that you're trying to address and trying to change. And you can affect that based on how you do tell a story, how you're able to articulately communicate that. And that's what we help out with, right? There's 1.5 million different applications of blockchain. I talked to a company, they're out of Georgia, the country, and they are using blockchain for tracking all of their different suppliers for their wines. Apparently they have a lot of vineyards and they make fantastic wines. And people want to know, people are very specific about where the grapes came from, were they organic, what were they treated with, etc. And that's how they're leveraging the application. I think that's fantastic because it's giving consumers extra data that they may not have originally known they wanted. But you talk to someone who is a wine enthusiast and they're like, this is fantastic. I've never knew that I could get this level of information. I'm very excited about this, right? And so I think the possibilities are truly limitless, right? We're limited by our own imaginations, our own minds. But it's about articulating that story the right way and then democratizing the fundraising process, the access to capital, the access to mentorship. And we really set out to do that with everything that we do. It's been a weird year with the pandemic, but every other program that is used to dealing with startups, they were not fully remote. We have been. This has been business as usual for us, if that feels kind of weird to say. But it's been a tremendous lift for the companies because more people are now aware of what we're doing. We're able to help more. We've brought on more employees on our side to help more startups get access to this coaching, this mentorship, this capital that they need to implement the changes that they're trying to do on the world.
I was read something today that was just released by the European Commission, and yesterday I think one or an entity in the United States that regulates consumer relations was also mentioning was about the ethical side. So sometimes we see things diverging in both sides of the Atlantic, but it seems that in relation to ethics and AI, that seems to be a convergence between regulators. So, Glenn, how do you see? You mentioned before in your intervention that the technology and engineers have been creating a lot of issues over the years. How do you see the ethical element coming in? Because as a sociologist, I feel that we need to work more in a kind of have a more multidisciplinary approach in relation to everything that we do. And we might need to do some changes in terms of curriculums in computer science. We need to embed other types of knowledge in order to make sure that at least at the computer science level, people are able to get the tools and resources in order to change a little bit the mindset that they have been embedded to over the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's one of those grand challenges. I'm working on a project, University of Surrey with University of Bath, who are leading, and University of Bristol. I'm working with the mechanical engineering department, and what we're looking at is, we call it transdisciplinary design engineering. We're particularly looking at the engineering space, but it's from there's different schools, but Jansch provided a framework looking at education. and how do we create transdisciplinary education? And we're used to, you know, single disciplines where we become niche expert. We might work multidisciplinary where we sit alongside each other parallel and we sort of lob stuff over the wall. And then you've got sort of interdisciplinary where you sort of work-ish together. But transdisciplinary is a shared culture. It's a shared understanding. It's a shared social structure. And so it's much more integrated. And it's, you know, there's different schools of transdisciplinary thought. But the Yant school goes back to, I think it's the 60s. And there's some nice little videos that Sue Laziano's put out from Bath, and there's a blog on Bath, and there's a whole conference coming up. But we're really starting to explore that as a new concept, and we're looking for firms to work with. I've got a PhD student, hopefully starting in September, to really look and try and understand the answer to your question, which is how do we work in a transdisciplinary way? So, you know, often they talked about, you know, the niche and then the T-shaped people. You might have heard of that, where you're very deep in one area, but you've got a little cross bit. And then you've got the M-shaped people who have got a couple of specialisms. But really, we want people who are deep experts, but actually culturally embedded and socially able to deal with across these streams. Because, you know, future computer scientists have to first think, you know, start their day, right, ethically, what's the implications of what I'm doing here? Socially, what are the implications of what I'm doing here? Oh, now I've got to do some really difficult maths. And it's these multiple skill sets and you know, that awareness, that's difficult to develop. And it's a challenge we're taking on, and it's been going on for a number of years. So if you look into transdisciplinary working, it's a really fascinating and developing area.
If I could just add to that, I mean, taking it at a philosophical level, what you've just described is what I call the ecological model. So if we look at the world, we have tended to be brought up to think that we're separate, special individual. In other words, we are distinct from each other. And if you look at the medical profession, you have specialists in every conceivable area. So a heart specialist knows about the heart, but the application of their work to the heart is not considered in the context of the rest of the body. So that the phenomenon that comes out of thinking that we're separate, that there's a sort of ceramic model of society, leads us to be very specialized and not at all integrated. And then the next model says, well, actually, no, we're a scientific model. So we're a random piece of DNA and it just comes and goes. And so you better look after yourself, because who knows what will happen and who cares what will happen, just do your thing. The ecological model actually says, well, no, everything is holistic, everything is connected. We're back to that connection. And you can't solve problems down the silos. You can only solve the problems today. They're too complicated to be done by silos. They have to be done by you call it transdisciplinary. I call it ecological model. It's the same thing. It's looking at the totality. And one of the difficulties we have in the world today is we're trying to find simplistic answers to complicated problems. And I've had discussions with very, very senior politicians who say, well, in fact, one said to me, you know, and you're right, these are very complicated problems, but we are asked a question in, say, Parliament or wherever, and we're expected to give an answer. And the fact that we don't have the time to really think it through doesn't alter the fact that we're going to give an answer anyway. And if you multiply that by the number of political interventions that take place, these complex problems require thinking, and they require time, and they require an ecological approach. They don't give it time. And so the knee-jerk reaction after knee-jerk reaction. That's why you see so many reversals of policies, because you do that one thing and then you don't realize, and then all of a sudden all these implications and the knock-on effects come up, and you've got to reverse it. And actually, thinking it through properly. And given the complexity of the technological developments that are taking place, just look at cybersecurity today. If we're really going to have the right approach to how do we manage that ethically, that is not a simple question. None of these are simple questions. They require an ecological approach with multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary views, with all kinds of different people taking part, including ordinary people from the street. How is this going to affect me? And I don't think people have got a clue of risks that they're currently undertaking through the cyber threat. And it's going to get worse. Just imagine with IoT and artificial intelligence and the edge computing, the risks are phenomenal, and we haven't got a clue. How do we get that across, and how do we manage that ethically? Those are the issues which I think are really, really challenging that we have to grapple with. That's what the change of thinking is about.
Yeah. You're making me think, Vernon, about a conversation I had with Charlie Northrup when he was telling me that he actually put down his research for a time because he realized how broadly impactful what he was working on was, and the fact that the technology could be taken and put to bad use, right, by bad actors. And he almost just totally stopped. And then he had a friend tell him, you know what, Charlie, if you don't do it, somebody else is going to. And at least, you know, at the foundational point, you have the right intentions and you're wanting to do it on behalf of humanity. And so the multi-key infrastructure that he's developed is human-centric. It's at that personal connection point from the physical into the digital, right? We've never had a presence on the web before. We've provisioned ourselves into other people's spaces, right? And then our digital footprint belongs to Facebook, to whomever, right? And so Charlie's infrastructure enables human agency in the digital world. And that the AI component that comes with that learns on the individual's behalf. And it doesn't take a billion points of data and, you know, try to take someone's algorithmic approach to how that data should be interpreted to make learning happen. It actually learns like a little kid with nouns, verbs, and modifiers. It actually builds a vocabulary, and then that vocabulary can be put into sentences and paragraphs and business process flow. And you can have an agent that runs an e-commerce center on your behalf, and multiple. I mean, it can interact in multiple ecospheres simultaneously. And the multi-key infrastructure he has is quantum proof. It's eternity number of potential keys ordered in a specific way, -1. So eternity -1. So yeah, this is the kind of technology that's coming. And when I said it's a quad ledger that we have developed to having, you know, blockchain is a ledger. It's a triple entry ledger, right? It was a leap from the double entry ledger that allowed for international trade, which was a huge, you know, innovation. You know, prior to that, we had cuneiform and, you know, like stamping little symbols in clay tablets. But that progression has happened so quickly. And yes, human beings need to have their awareness raised of what's possible. And then we do need this universal framework of things, consortia, people all over the world from every walk of life, from every nation, gender, you know, philosophical viewpoint. That collaborative conversation needs to happen as technologies that are this powerful come into use, because there's very dystopian ways to use that same tech. You know, if you think about what can be done to control human beings when you have a digital, I don't want to use any specific country's dollar, yuan, whatever, it doesn't matter, right? But as soon as you can take someone's value transfer and control it and manage it under parameters that control their behavior, you really get into some very dark weeds very, very quickly.
Yeah. Well, and we can see this happening. We can see this attempts at this happening all the time. And we have to have absolute transparency, and we have to have truth. You know, what is truth? I mean, in the end, you can't legislate for truth. You know what it is. You know what it is. And we have to have transparency. There is no transparency. There's too little transparency. And unless we have that, the dystopian aspects that you're talking about, the ability for people to control, which is what a lot of governments try to do. They try and control everything. And that is one of the big problems that we have. And this technology is playing straight into that, because it gives the capability of doing that, unless human beings and everybody then says no. But no, we don't want that. That's not how we should, that's not the sort of society that we want. And we have to stand up for that. And people need to stand up for what they think is right. You know, one of the greatest tragedies of today is not the loudness of the so-called bad people. It's the unbearable silence of the so-called good people. At some stage, we have to stand up. We have to get together and say, no, this is not the society we want. And in corporations, we're doing that. I mean, the purpose, I mean, I'm privileged to be sitting in Atos, and the work that is being done to try and get this done through having a purpose, through having a meeting, through having openness. And it's not perfect by any stretch, but the effort that's going into that and the results of that are really encouraging. But this is just one corporation. And I know that corporations are trying to do this, but it's an enormous effort. More energy needs to be put behind that aspect rather than just technology. The technology actually is going to take care of itself anyway, but it's the mind side which worries me, because the energy is not going into that. On the contrary, I think that too much effort is being put to say, how can I use this for me, for control, for this, for that, instead of for humanity, for our future, for our children, for our grandchildren. That's where the energy should be.
I think this is where decentralization is interesting. I'm not saying it's a solution. Obviously, there's the various blockchain decentralization providing transparency, visibility, traceability, good data in, good data out, and all the caveats which come with blockchain-based systems and who actually controls the mining and all these other things. And then there's the other technologies which are also decentralized. I'm thinking of Solid and we developed Data Swift, which is originally it was called Hub of All Things, but that was your data, your rules, and it was very much built from the individual holds their data. You know, Solid models are saying you hold your data, and instead of you, when you buy insurance, the insurance company taking all your details into a central server and processing it and giving you, a price, they send their algorithm to you. You do all your data analysis in your space, and all they need is a hash to say that you've paid or not. Nothing else matters. Yeah. Everything else can be held by you. But that mindset, firstly, it requires a consumer who is engaged and who cares, because most consumers just don't care. I'd love that they did, but they don't. And this is where I think governments need to be smarter and say, right, we have to take some responsibility and legislate. We've seen it with GDPR. I think that's, it's not a bad start. But similar things, pushing people towards control and take ownership of your data. We've got issues around AI, because AI is learning on whatever you put out there. If it's a weird thing, it reminds me of the music industry where, when sampling first started, we were all of an age probably to remember that. People just took whatever they wanted and made this new music. And then the IPRS guys went, just a minute, you should be paying for that. I think we're at the same place with AI. At the moment, they're just taking all your photos, they're taking all your data, and they're training their systems. But that's my data that you're then using. So again, you should pay me for that if you want to train your data on it. And me owning my own data and having a firewall, I think that needs to come, and I can only see that coming from government. Companies we shouldn't expect them to, well, maybe we should expect them to act ethically, but they're always going to act in the benefit of their shareholders, because that's corporate governance. They're demanded to do that, but the government needs to act and put these rules in place, and that might create better technology. It will, direct and shape the way we develop these new systems.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Last week I was following one of an event that was taking place in Germany called Hannover Messe. It's one of the largest technology events in the world, probably bigger than CES in terms of attendees. And there was the event started with a kind of a debate between the industry leaders and politicians. And one of the industry leaders was asking one of the politicians from the German government, "Oh, 11 months ago you promised us a digital passport, and nothing really happened yet. So don't." On your words, then you are mentioning that this needs to come from politics. But do politicians have the right skills? Are they really able to have this type of discussions? Because sometimes, if I look to some of the events that have been taking place in Europe and even if in the United States, sometimes you see people asking very naive questions. Politicians don't seem to be prepared for this type of challenges.
Well,
What's
you're right, and but you have to understand where do they come from? What was their education? How have they been brought up? And they haven't been brought up in that idiom at all. And they're overwhelmed. Quite frankly, they're overwhelmed with what's happening, and you can see that with the decision. The decision making is chaotic. I'm afraid that's the only way you can describe it. And I'm not blaming them, because I think if we were in that position, given that education, given that knowledge base, we'd be lost as well. The system doesn't work, and it doesn't give time. They're not supported correctly. And that's why I think the whole thing has to be shifted around so that they do get given the time and the resources and the help that they needed. And the politicians, for how long? 4, 5 years, 3, 4 years, how long? These issues are much too complex for that. We need a different way, a different world order, effectively, in order to deal with these complex problems. You cannot do it like shifting the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's trying to find quick solutions to problems that require a great deal of thought. And every time it happens, they get it wrong. And that, again, it's not a question of blame, it's a question of process.
Sorry, I would like to how do you see the role of blockchain to encourage democracy and more people to participate in these type of discussions?
Were you directing that question to me?
No, I would like to Charlie to
okay, Charlie, I'm sorry. It blipped out for a second. I wasn't sure if you'd said my name. So, Charlie.
I think it'll be interesting. Well, having records that are irrefutable for any interaction that we can have, whether that's environmental, whether that's comments that someone says. I think that the implication there is tremendous. Right now, there's still recordings of stuff that happens, and people still will sit there and say, "Oh, no context, no context." I think that blockchain will give us the opportunity to hard code and contextualize data points that are currently existing, and I think that is really what's going to be impactful. Is looking at like how can we track context long term, and how do we then use that to shape policy, to shape our decision making as citizens, in a democracy like the States. I think that's going to be really interesting, and that's going to be really fascinating as to how we can do that. I think that blockchain as a technology can absolutely help us do that. It's going to be up to someone far smarter than myself to figure out how do we do that in a right and just way.
Linda, you wanted to comment?
Now, I've always called Bitcoin free speech when someone's asked me for a short definition. And I do see it in that light, in that, we vote with our value transfer in many ways. And there is a need for there to be transparency, not necessarily just in the US with the issues there, but on a global scale, especially when it comes to the monetary policy and how things are executed. And one of the things that is a real pain point for me is when I see that this time value correlation that should equal whatever money we've earned is being disconnected by entities that are making choices that are not in the best interests of the general masses, right? And that is, in my mind, it's a really huge problem that blockchain technology and that decentralization has a chance to help solve for, and give people the opportunity to put their value into something that can't be arbitrarily inflated, and provide opportunity for them to vote with their value. And I think that is the essence of free speech. And it is the democratization of opportunity globally that we have currently the ability to engage in. And there's a lot of nuance there, but I think there's a lot of pain points that need to be addressed, and I think there have been some strides made in that direction. And in the UK, Barry, I don't know how familiar you guys are. Anyway, there's steps being taken to have those deep conversations to reimagine what money should be. And because money is the base of where elections turn in many cases, if we can reimagine money, we can reimagine the outcomes of who is in power over time. And maybe it will be this global economy that doesn't require the same level of massive centralized organizations. There is that possibility. So
yeah,
thank you,
well,
Linda.
you're right. I mean, obviously this is not to do with blockchain, but philosophically, I make a distinction between money and wealth. And who is serving who? And what do we mean by wealth? What do we mean by success? All these things we are conditioned to think in a certain way about those things, and actually they're not helpful. They're unhelpful. However, that's another debate. It's another debate.
Thank you, Vernon. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Charlie and Glenn. I think I hope that those of you who have the opportunity to spend this hour with us from wherever you are in the world have taken something from our conversation. I definitely enjoy to have the opportunity to meet Charlie, Glenn, and Linda. Already, I knew Vernon for quite some time. So thank you so much for being here today, and look forward to follow up and to continue the conversation wherever the web or wherever place it will take us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Antonio, and thank you, colleagues. I've learned a lot from you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. I really enjoyed it, and let's stay in touch in the digital world. And I guess anyone else who wants to check in. I think everybody on here's profile, if they can't find us, it's their problem.
Yeah, there's a glitch in the system somewhere. Thank you very much.
Great to connect with you guys.
For your comments. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Ciao.